Hi, I'm Sam Lilenfield. I'm an embroidery and fiber artist from Canton, Ohio, and today I'm going to be walking you through a beginner-friendly embroidery project that will end up looking something like this by the time that we're done. For this project, you're going to need a 5-inch embroidery hoop, fabric of your choice. I prefer muslin, linen, or cotton. I think that's the easiest to work with. You're going to need a pair of scissors, an embroidery needle, a couple pieces of tape, fabric or tacky glue, and then you'll also want to print out the PDF that will be available on MassMu Museum's website, and this will line up with a 5-inch embroidery hoop. The first thing that you're going to want to do is put your fabric inside of your hoop. To do that, you'll separate these two pieces, place the fabric on top of the closed circle, and then place this top piece with the notch on top of both of those. And then you'll tighten this top piece and go around the fabric to tighten it. You'll just want to keep twisting and pulling the fabric tight. And you should end up with something like this. Once it's really taut, like a drum, and you can hear that sound, you'll know that you'll be ready to stitch with it. Then you'll want to cut out your pattern. Okay. And then I like to take a couple pieces of tape and put them on the front side of the pattern like this, so you can stick it inside of this hoop and see it through the front, and then just easily remove it once you're ready to stitch. So I'll put a few more pieces of tape and then start tracing. Okay, and then you'll kind of just want to look through the front and see that everything is lined up how you would like it. For this one, it'll be easy to tell if it's straight by the little bench or shelf that the plants are on. Okay, and then you'll have something like this. Depending on what kind of fabric you have, you might want to hold this up in front of a window or find some sort of bright light source to trace it. But I think that with this fabric, I'll be fine to just push my hand behind it a little bit and be able to see everything. Now that our pattern is all traced out onto our fabric, we can thread our needle and start stitching. I like to take about an arm's length of thread. I think that gives you a good manageable length while you're stitching. Trim that. And then you'll want to separate this. This thread will have 6 strands in it, and I like to take 2 of the 6. You can use all of them. I just think that it leaves a chunkier, not as clean look. So I have 2 of the 6, and I'm separating those with my thumb, just sliding it down. I find that just makes everything go a little bit faster and doesn't knot up as much. And I have my 2 strands, and this will go on my needle. Now that we have the 2 strands of thread and the needle, we can go ahead and thread that by sticking one end of the thread into the eye hole at the top here. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky. But okay, there we go. You'll want to put the needle in the middle of the thread. Tie both of the ends together. Just a couple of knots so it doesn't come through the fabric. Okay, there's 2 knots, and then your needle should look like this, and you're ready to start stitching. Okay, now that the needle is threaded, we're going to start stitching. There are only 2 different stitches used in this project. I used a satin stitch to fill everything in, and a back stitch for the border in black, the outliner and everything. So first we're going to do satin stitch. You're going to want to have your first stitch come up to the back, and I'm going to start with this pot right here and fill that in. Make my first stitch, bring it up from the back so the knot is up against the fabric. Come to the other side of the pot over here and bring it back down. And that is your first stitch. And now that the needle and thread are on the inside of the hoop, you're going to bring your needle right underneath where that last stitch was, but not through it. And then pull that through. And then come to the other side over here. And again, just go right under that thread, but don't go through it. Then you can see, if you just keep repeating that, how that will fill in very nicely. I'm going to be continuing with this satin stitch by going up from the back over here, right underneath my last stitch, and meeting this one right underneath it on the opposite side, and then coming up from the back on this side, underneath my last stitch. And just repeating that back and forth until everything is filled in. If your edges aren't very clean, that's what the back stitch will be for at the very end. Like, you can see that this isn't a perfect line. By the time that we're done, the back stitch at the end will clean everything up. Okay, and now my thread is pretty short, so I'm going to go ahead and tie that off. Okay, and then just tie these 2 pieces together just a couple times so it doesn't come through the front of the fabric. And just trim that down again. Okay, and then I will just be re-threading my needle and filling the rest of this in. Now that my first pot is filled in, I went ahead and threaded my needle for the color of the second one. And I'm just going to be repeating the same process for this, just filling it in from top to bottom with a satin stitch. Up from the back, across to the other side. And then up from the back again, right underneath that. The 2 pots are filled in, and now I'm going to fill in the shelf below them. I'm going to start with the 2 little legs and then the long section above them. Okay, this first section is filled in. I'm going to go ahead and cut this, rethread my needle, and move over to the other side because this fabric is very thin, and if I just move my thread over here, you'll be able to see that through the light fabric, and I don't want that to just show through. For the leaves, we're still going to be using a satin stitch, but we're going to be doing this one a little bit differently. Instead of going from side to side, I make diagonal stitches starting from the middle and moving out to each side in that direction on either plant. So I will start the bottom in the middle, this line right here. And I will make 1 diagonal line. I'll just thread that up. Okay. Come up next to that. And then go back down on that center line. And that is the start of those nice diagonal lines. Again, I'm going to come up from the middle. Follow this diagonal line and then go right back down right above it and just repeat that on the whole leaf. Filled in the rest of these leaves, and now I'm ready to move on to this plant. The way I did these stitches were to get this textured effect. I went slightly beyond the line that I had drawn every other stitch. And I'll explain up close, but I would alternate long, short stitch, long, short stitch to get this jagged edge. But if you don't feel like doing that, you can obviously just fill in the pattern as normal. So just to reiterate, you can either fill in these leaves like you did these ones and just stop at this line, or you can make shorter lines that stop at the line that we drew on the end and alternate between those stitches, and longer ones that extend out past that, and then a shorter stitch again right on that line, and then alternate back to that long stitch, and just continuing like that, and that will give you this nice texture. I am finished up with the satin stitch, all the leaves are filled in, and now I'm gonna go around the border and do the back stitch. I'm gonna be using this thread ball. It's the same brand as the rest of the thread I've been using. It's just slightly thicker and it's only one strand instead of the 6. So I'm gonna thread my needle with that. I'm gonna thread this needle slightly different for the back stitch. Instead of meeting it in the middle and tying both ends together, I will be tying one end off on the needle and then tying a few knots at the other end just so it will not go through the fabric. And that's typically how I thread a needle for back stitch. Okay. Now making a back stitch starts off very similarly to your satin stitch. You'll come up from the bottom and then go back down. And then what makes this a back stitch is you'll want to come up a little bit past where you put your last stitch in. And then once your thread is on top, you'll go back into that last stitch that you made, connecting the two together. And that just gives it a nice clean line. So I'll just keep going with that. I tend to make longer stitches on straighter areas and shorter ones around curves. And I really just think that this back stitch finishes the entire thing and hides any imperfections that you might have made or anything like that. I finished up the back stitch, so now I can finish the rest of the hoop so it is ready to hang. To do that, I like to trim down the excess fabric, tacky glue what is left to the inner hoop, and then trim away any excess thread. So to start that, trim this down, and you don't need a lot of fabric left over. Something like this. And then you'll take your tacky glue or your fabric glue and just make like little dots around the perimeter and stick that down for a little bit. I'm gonna let this dry for a little bit and then it will be ready to hang. After a few minutes, the glue on the back should be dry and your piece will be ready to hang or display however you'd like. Again, I'm Sam Lilenfield. Thanks so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed making this project with me.